We will now move straight on to the second presentation of the first session. Ms. Myounghee Jeong will give her presentation titled Women Illustrated in Joseon-period Sweet Dew Paintings and Their Meaning. She is the director of exhibition at the National Museum of Korea, and she has organized exhibitions such as Buddhist painting that came out of the Buddhist sanctuary and many other large and small scale exhibitions. She studied art history at Hongik University and continues to research in the Buddhist paintings and Buddhist rituals. Please welcome her with a big round of applause. As announced, I am Myounghee Jeong. I will explore the iconography of women and their meaning in Sweet Dew painting named Gamrodo of Joseon dynasty. Gamrodo is a distinctive genre of Joseon Buddhist paintings with rich pictorial elements and narrative structure. It shows it was used for various rituals such as Uran Bunje and Suryukje. This presentation, based on previous literature, focuses on the feminine image that is reproduced in Gamrodo. The table of presentation is as follows. The paintings show the desire, ideology, and a desire of communities living as a Buddhist follower and women in the Joseon dynasty is captured in the presentation. Also, the painting not only follows the ritual text, but also reflects how people accepted the painting. It had a disciplining function, but also captured the social values. First, we will look at how Uran Bunje and Suryukje looks at the role of woman as mother. It is closely tied to filial piety. Also, practitioners such as bhikkhuni and women who are working for their livelihood will explore the cases of female shaman and nuns. So being a Buddhist follower and woman in a Confucian society is my first topic. The gender perspective was mostly focused on royal women, so we looked at them as patronage and donors. Many documents such as travel passes, cemeteries, and pseudo-history does not reflect the lives of different class women. Usually, it shows a very typical idea of mother, wife, and daughter, which reflects the Confucius values. In fact, the textual and visual materials needs to be seen from the point of their consumers. The Gamrodo looks at detailed aspects of female lives, and they need to be studied in the context of the times. Women were half the population, but they were not heavily recorded. So if we take a gender perspective on the Buddhist art, then we will reveal many elements of their lives. They were banned from joining Buddhist projects or Buddhist affairs. Those women going up to the temples or who engage in night ceremony, ancestral rites, or local god festivals were supposed to be punished, but their faithful activities continued. In fact, the rulers did not want people of different genders, classes, or monastic affiliations to mingle. And women were forced to abide by the Confucius texts such as Nehun and Samgang Hengshilto. They were in charge of making clothing and food for the ancestral rites. Men were supposed to study papers and texts, but women were in charge of silk weaving. So there was a very strict gender role, and labor and ancestral rights duties of women were especially focused. But in Kwangyong Pyeonsang-do, which is a drawing of the Buddhist heaven, it shows women viewing the pure land. So in the Buddhist disciplines, it showed that the Buddhist nature can be found in everyone, including women. In 수월 관음도, it was patroned and sponsored by Jiyoon and Myounghee, who were both women. Professor Eun Park interpreted this as how patrons reflected themselves, representations of themselves as having reached the pure land. Even despite the widespread Confucius values, women were practitioners of faith who had the willingness to enlighten the Buddhist nature within themselves. Bhikkhu, bhikkhuni, kings and queens, and all of the souls wishing to meet the Dharma nectar are drawn in the Kamrodo. Seikyoji's collection of Kamrodo was in fact sponsored by Han Kum. She was the great donor. In 2010, the Kamrodo was donated to NMK from Ryu Kanji at Kyoto, Japan. We will now move on to the meaning of female images. First, we will look at the tradition of Uran Punje and the role of women as mothers. The soul who has fallen into the realm of the hungry ghost is saved by Mautgalya Yama, and this is a very popular story that was accepted in the Joseon dynasty. The pictures are rather out of order, but why don't we look at this slide first? In the late Goryeo dynasty, Baktongsa was a text used to learn Chinese, and it contains an illustration of Uran Punje that took place in Gyeongsu-sa. Many of the nuns and monks are in a prayer position, and they are listening to the story of Mautgalyayana, which is Mongyeon in Korean. In the record of Uran Punje, we can see the active roles taken on by women. In Yongjae Chonghwa Songhyun writes that Uran Punje was a very active, popular ritual at the temples of nuns, and many of the women came with their offerings to invoke the souls of their late parents. Many women really wanted to take part in the ritual of Uran Punje. And in 1536, if we look at the Byeonsangdo that was published in Mongyeon-gyeong at the Yeonggi-sa temple, Mongyeon sees his mother reborn in the body of a dog, and he goes to the market, buys willow leaves and pine tree branches to save his mother's soul from the body of a dog. If you look at the bottom of the screen, there is a lonely dog, and that represents the soul of his mother. The hungry ghost, in fact, was in the body of the woman mother represented as the dog. And also in the Hangang Suryukje, we can look at women who are participating in viewing and lecture. They were looking at the paintings while they were listening to the lecture and stories. Painting was a very effective medium to deliver and convey the messages of Buddha's teachings. In fact, saving souls from disasters goes back to before Suryukje, or the Water Land Festival. The texts have pictorial illustrations, so disasters such as being plundered or those natural disasters. In these situations, people can be saved if they recite the Dharani, and this message is conveyed through the paintings. Mongyeon-gyeong. In fact, the translation of Mongyeon-gyeong and Uran Pungeong, which are Buddhist texts, was very influential in promoting female faith. Actually, women believers took part in correction work of the translations. When King Sejo read out the text, Jeong Han wrote it down. Hadan, Heong, Doyoung, and 7 other women took part in this process. it is important to take note that the female monks took part in this process. In the 관심법계도, agui is in the center, and cherry blossom pine trees, maple trees, and the winter scene represent the different stages of people's lives. Yomna Wang's judgment is in the center, and the 6 realms and 4 worlds of enlightenment, a total of 10 worlds, is illustrated. The bottom part illustrates hell. And in fact, a narrator who is explaining the painting is a role that has ancient roots. Edoki nun was the nun in Japan who was responsible for explaining the paintings. We could also reflect on how kamnodo was used in the scenes where paintings were hung and audiences were listening to the story. In fact, the kamnodo at Seongju-sa was commissioned by a monk for the soul of his mother, his widowed mother. Jijang Posal and Mungneon Jongcha were the projections of the sun. Kumgang Pan Yakyong was commissioned by a monk for the soul of his mother, and many of such similar cases can be found. Woman as mother is an important theme in kamnodo, so the tie between mother and son shows that, in fact, the conception that leaving the secular home is against filial piety is not valid. We will look at bhikkhuni as practitioners of faith. Bhikkhuni is one of the 4 groups of followers of Buddha. If you look at the text for Suryukje rituals, there is a ritual that invokes the soul of monks, and it calls on both the souls of male monks, bhikkhus, and bhikkhunis, who are female monks. In fact, if you look at the translated text of 관세음보살 보문품, it says that when 관음보살 transforms, he transforms into male monks or bhikkhuni or ubase or ubai, but they were usually reproduced as bhikkhus. But in 관음 32응 신토, Avalokitesvara was reproduced as female monk, bhikkhuni. So, however, still the composition of bhikkhuni is rarely recorded. Out of the 70 pieces of kamnodo, bhikkhuni was represented in 40 of them, so they are very meaningful. The kamnodo produced in 1580 is the oldest painting that is recorded as 하단탱, so the painting for the lower altar. Bhikkhuni is represented among many of the monks with cymbals and drums and other instruments. In Kamnodo of Seikyoji, you can see the differentiated representation of nuns from monks. Unlike male monks who have mustaches, the female monks were drawn with pink paints, and at times they are shown as wearing a hat that is black or gray. The Kamnodo at Chotenji of Japan, in the process of invoking souls, bhikkhunis are illustrated. Uran Punje usually took place at female monk monasteries, and usually women attended, but we need to still research whether ancestral rites was a domain where women were more active. Looking at the Kamnodo of Leeum Museum of Art, bhikkhuni were illustrated in a distinguished manner apart from the bhikkhu, and they were also a part of the ritual monks. But distinguishing bhikkhunis from bhikkhus was a practice that was only limited to the 수륙제 cases at Sangesa and Unheungse, and later on the difference was of gender was only recorded in the titles. But we can still see from other records that Bikuni took part in the rites, but in the visual representations, Bikunis were less and less distinguished from the male monks. So the Bikuni temples were closed down, and the group itself became smaller, and I think the social atmosphere that banned the existence of Bikunis was reflected in such artistic practices. And we will look at the female patrons, starting with the court ladies. If we look at 가래도감 의궤 of Yeongjo and Jeongsun Wanghu, female shaman 상궁s, who are the high-ranking court ladies, and other court ladies appear. Only the rank and task of the court ladies were designated in the Gyeongguk Taechon, but many other elements were left to the court to decide. The female members of the court had ranks from 1 to 9, and court ladies were the female officials. They were critical members of the court who were paid by the state. 5,000 court ladies existed, and in fact, there were 5,000 court officials, and 10%, totaling 500 to 600, were court ladies. And this is a record of how the court ladies were paid in grains or cash, grains or rice or fish or beans. And many small farmers made up most of the lay people, so we can see that as they were paid with 10 parcels of rice, court ladies were in fact one of the high paid professions in the era of Joseon dynasty. Before the Japanese invasion, this is one of the rare porcelains that goes back to 1586. It was sponsored by Sang-gung, Kim Sang-gung. She died at 72 years old. And when King heard of the Sang-gung's death, he actually sponsored this porcelain to be buried with Sang-gung in her grave. The Sang-gungs and court ladies performed many different roles in the court, and this is a description of a court lady. They are illustrated as figures who are wearing very luxurious garments and hair accessories. If we look at the portrayal of 궁녀s in media, it is quite different from their portrayal in the ancient records. We are now looking at multifaceted research in 궁녀, which is based on various records such as their payment invoices, their work journals, records, letters, and the records of their assets. As I would like to mention first, 궁녀s took part throughout the Buddhist affairs and Buddhist projects, but they were not very at the forefront. We still need a lot of research into how they interacted with the temples and how exactly they involved in the Buddhist affairs. This is a vest of 상궁권, which was excavated along with other vests that belonged to the queens. In the 관음전, when the court ladies made or commissioned Buddhist paintings, they have also consecrated their garments. So there were such cases where court ladies commissioned Buddhist art. But if we look at the records, they are usually making wishes for their parents. In the text written by 상궁 권혜경, it shows her wish to be transformed into a man in the next life, to enter the Buddha's realm, to see Buddha and hear the unheard Dharma, to see the unseen truth, and attain Buddhahood. She transcribed many, many Buddhist texts. 상궁 is rank 5, which means they are the highest rank court ladies. And this painting was commissioned by 상궁s and 궁녀s. They were in the 18th century usually intermediaries for Buddhist affairs, sponsored by queens, but in the 19th century they themselves became great patrons of Buddhist art. Now we will move on to the cases of female shaman. So this is a record of how a female shaman organized a ritual for the souls of her late parents. 석전유해 is a dictionary written by monk 연담 유일. It defines 비구 as male monk, 비구니 as female monks, 우바세 as male laity, and 우바이 as female shamans. In fact, 우바세 and 우바이, going back to their Sanskrit origins, refer to female and male laity who did not leave the secular world, but during the Joseon dynasty, when the record was produced, they were viewed as male laity and female shaman. So they were half part of the monastic community, half in the secular world, who often worked as patrons for Buddhist affairs. As we can see in the Gamno-do that belongs to Leeum, 우바세 and 우바이 is 거사 and 사당. As the hat that was excavated from the grave of Andong-kwon, many of the hats are female hats. A key figure is Jeong, who was affiliated with the Myeongwol Sadang. Jeong's sponsored Gamno-do has no records, but in 1705 she commissioned the Kwaebul at Yongmunsa, and she was the great patron for Cheonbuldo and Palsangdo at Yongmunsa in 1709, and she took very active parts in such Buddhist projects. Most of the inscriptions record the contribution of her. She lived in Yeonhee-gae in front of Jongmyo, and it was her lifelong vow to commission Cheonbultaeng and Palsangtaeng. She sponsored many different Buddhist projects such as Batang offering, Hangnang, lamp and colors. So she was in fact a great donor, according to many of the records. There are many records where monks have had lifelong vows for Buddhist projects, but this case is rare in that it was about a female shaman. Also, they are often recorded as one body, which is very specific to the records about female shaman sadangs. In Gamno-do, it also illustrates 무녀 along with sadangs. 무녀, or female, also female shaman. They are the ones who wander about to console those with concerns and cast away bad spirits. They worked in partnership with sadang. Most of these materials are from the exhibition of the Seoul Museum of History of Art. So we are seeing that a lot of research about the female practitioners of Buddhist faith are taking place. In fact, female shamans cast away disasters and invoke blessings, so they were in charge of official national rites and ancestral rites. But they were also employed by the noble families, which were the more unofficial rituals. They lived near the medical agency back in the time of Joseon in Hanyang capital, so they were managed within the national institution. They also nursed for sick people and took care of people who had contagious diseases. There are no records of the individual female shaman, but they were viewed as professional women who also enjoyed and sponsored Buddhist art and contributed to the production of Buddhist art. Looking at Kamrodo paintings, we can see women who had special roles with their hats and their special clothings. And if you look at Suraksa and Hanguksa's Kamrodo, we can see women working in the kitchen, women cooking and living their daily lives were depicted in a very natural manner alongside men. Kamrodo also conveys the ideal role of the state. I do not address this topic in depth in my presentation, but 환과 고독, meaning people who are old, lonely, and with no one to take care of them, are a theme that frequently appears, and it also depicts orphans with no parents, so it emphasizes the role of the state who is responsible to take care of these people. So I will now close my presentation. So centered around Kamrodo, I looked into how the image of female members of Joseon society are represented in religious paintings. Kamrodo highlights Biguni and Uba-i, but also represents female souls as part of the forlorn wandering souls. It captures the life of women who were half the population. Under the Confucian society, women were forbidden from practicing religion, but the Buddhist teachings taught that everyone can find their Buddhist nature despite their affiliation or their gender. So this let women know that they could also reach enlightenment. Also, Confucius' values of filial piety was reflected in Kamrodo, such as Mongnyeon-kyung, which tells the story of Mongnyeon, who saves his mother's soul. And it's also justified leaving the secular world. Also, it shows the lonely beings and women who suffered various hardships during life in the Kamrodo. They were an important iconographic theme. In the 16th century Kamrodo, female monks are often represented. Despite the persecuting policies that closed down female monk temples, these records show that they were still a big part of the Buddhist rituals. If we look at various texts, and the Kamrodo in 18th and 19th century, we see women who are carrying on with their livelihood as professionals such as hangungs or female shaman. If we look at the case of Sadang Myojeong, it was her lifelong vow to commission Cheonbuldo and Palsangdo. The Buddhist teachings accepted Confucian values to a certain extent, but also granted women a sense of achievement. Women took part in translating texts, and they also listened to lectures that was aided with a visual illustration, Kamrodo. So Kamrodo was the fabric of the practices of faith of female believers. Going forward in the field of Buddhist study of traditional Buddhist art, they need to expand the scope beyond royal women. So my research is rather an introductory research, and I hope it will be an impetus for a more active research into female role in Buddhist art history. Thank you.